Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about how to play a dwarf.
Sure.
Is that what we're talking about?
Well, we'll talk about dwarves in general. I don't know about how to play them, but I guess it includes a little bit of that.
That's mostly what I read about.
So dwarves, to me, dwarves are always tied to Tolkien in the front lobe of my mind, mainly because...
And an aside to Saul, everything is tied to Tolkien. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I guess in fantasy role-playing games, it probably is, simply because I think he had such an impact on fantasy books and fantasy tropes, right? That's my opinion. I mean, I know some people may disagree with that, but for the most part, the way he wrote the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit, he really had this concept of what they were, the different races and what they were, and then other people kind of built upon that, even if they changed it a little bit for their own world. Let's say some other author, I can't, for the way my mind works right now, I can't think of any other authors.
I could think of Terry Pratchett.
Okay, well, Terry Pratchett, when did he start? He was writing, what, in the 70s?
I don't know. I have all the books up there, but I'm not going to get one right now.
I think so. So he was writing in the 70s and
the 80s.
And the 80s.
And 90s.
Right. But I mean, when he started writing. So I think he definitely was writing about tropes of fantasy tropes, right?
Well, in Guards, Carrot is a human that was raised by dwarves,
Right.
so he thinks very dwarfishly,
Yes.
and I love that idea of the way that Terry
I actually
Pratchett
read
does
that one. I don't know. I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast, but Jolene used to drive me nuts reading those books because she'd be cackling in the room next to me while I'm trying to go to sleep, and I'm like, "What is so funny?" He goes, "Oh, this book, Terry Pratchett's hilarious," and I'm like, "Oh,
That's okay. I found my reading mate that loved Terry Pratchett also and drove his wife crazy.
right." You're right. It's an interesting way of looking at it because Terry Pratchett, what he did is he took all these fantasy elements and twisted them, right? Kind of making fun of them in a reverent sort of way, right? Because when I read Guards, it was a funny book. It was pretty hilarious and it was pretty well written. It might be one of the first ones in the series or the first one he wrote about. I'm not sure, but it was very good. It was very funny, and I liked the way he was being irreverent toward the whole fantasy trope, but it wasn't insulting. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, here we go with this idea that, and Carrot, I believe was his name, right? Because he was a redheaded guy.
Yes.
Right. So, and then, the whole, wasn't he like a prince of humans or something like that? He had a magical sword and all this other stuff. So it was making fun of that whole trope about the hidden prince and all this other stuff. And at the same time, Carrot was kind of quite a character, right? He was very straight-laced, very, that's why the only word I can come up with is straight-laced. It's been a long time since I read that book. In that depiction of Carrot, you get the idea of what dwarves are like and how in Terry Pratchett's world they are. And a lot of it, that is some of the fantasy elements of Tolkien, of dwarves being in mines, right? Digging in the earth, and they're pretty good with stonework and all this other stuff. So those tropes are stuff that almost every dwarf culture has in almost every fantasy book or game that there is out there. And I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that Tolkien idea of what dwarves are like, just filters down through all these fantasy books to today.
Well, if you listen to the episode about elves, and I'm not sure if Saul how the publishing goes, but we talked about elves in the same way.
Yeah.
And I found it very interesting. The most interesting thing I found was that people don't like elves and dwarves in their games all the time.
Right. I think a lot of people don't like elves because of the way they're represented, right? They're like hoity-toity or...
which we talked about already.
Right, already. And so... And dwarves are the exact opposite, right? They're gruff. They're not necessarily graceful like elves. They're more of the earth, right? In fact, in the earth, if you think about it. So they don't have this aura of
Sparkly cleanliness.
Yeah, and better than everybody else, right? And dwarves have this, like I said, this earthy element of them, and I think they're not as disliked by fantasy role playing people. That's what I'm talking about. Of course, there's really no real dwarves out there, so but they don't like to play them. They don't like to. I mean, elves. They don't like playing them, but and dwarves are slightly more likable, even though, according to a lot of posts I read in Reddit and other places, a lot of people don't like dwarves either because of for one reason or another. I think one person complained that there are too many sub races of dwarves, right, and stuff like that. So mechanically, they didn't like that, but at the same time, they would say, "Well, I really like playing a dwarf," or "They're okay, but they have these problems." They were talking about D&D, and D&D is a main driving force of what fantasy games include.
So if you're going to play a dwarf, how are you going to play a dwarf?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the way their culture is, right?
He says it like they're like there's history books on it.
Well, they have history, right? If you look at Tolkien, he talks about the history of the dwarves, and in almost every fantasy book, they have to talk about them and where they come from because you have to establish what those people are like.
Yes.
In every series. I mean, the only one I haven't, there's a whole bunch I haven't read, but there's one guy, I forget his name, but he wrote a book called Orcs, and now I think he wrote a book called Dwarves, and he deals with dwarves, obviously, in the whole book, but I never read it, and I think it's somebody, Abercrombie, I think is his name. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he's very popular, and he's very prolific because the only reason I haven't read his books is because they're really freaking thick. They're huge. There's 1,000 pages.
Okay, well, you'll have to point it out to me because I'm not sure what you're talking about there.
Anyway, so obviously people talk about dwarves. They have them in their books. I mean, they write about dwarves, and in those books, they have this culture, whatever culture that is. But for the most part, almost every time I pick up a fantasy book, and does not necessarily D&D, there's other fantasy books out there. Dwarves are short, right? They're hairy. Mm-hmm. They have beards, and they.
And for some reason, they have a Scottish accent.
Well, yeah, it is kind of weird.
I think that just has to do with the movies.
Yeah, because when I was reading Lord of the Rings, I didn't catch the Scottish accent from the written word. So I don't know. I think you're right. It has to do with the movies, though. Though I'm trying to remember if people talk with a Scottish accent in the when they were dwarves before the movies.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think so, but I think you're right. The Lord of the Rings movies has really impacted a lot of people's belief of what dwarves are like, and that translates to how they're portrayed or how people play them. Right? Mm-hmm. Gimli, for example, he's. You're right. He talks with a Scottish accent. He's gruff.
That has to do with the actor that portrayed him.
That's true. But obviously, they didn't voice coach him and say, well, you can't talk to Scottish. I don't think he's Scottish, is he? Anyway. So I think, and I keep mentioning Tolkien, but he does have a huge impact on what people believe or what people's ideas of what a dwarf is. So what else about dwarves? They like mining, right? And they can do amazing stone work for whatever that entails, either shaping stone to make houses and buildings.
Yeah, I read this article about dwarves in D&D.
Okay,
and they were talking about they're one of the longest lived races, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably right after elves.
Yes.
So if you're going to play one, you should take that into consideration.
Yeah.
That they think things through. They don't have to rush in.
Well, they're seen as wise, right? I think so. I mean,
I don't know.
I've always had that idea. I don't even know where I got that idea.
And then, you didn't get it from the movie because they didn't portray Gimli as, they portrayed him as, let's go do this now kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right. But I think Gimli might have been young.
That's true. But then most of the dwarves that you're going to be playing in a role-playing game are going to be young.
Right. They're going to be brash. I mean, I think when you take any kind of character that you are and you go adventuring, automatically that you're a outlier than everybody else, right? Most people stay home till the farm or cobble some cobbles, and stay home. Stay home and do the 9 to 5, whatever that is. Even in medieval worlds, right? You got jobs or you have work that you have to do, and if you leave that security and go off into the wild and hunting buried treasure and stuff like that, you're a little bit strange, right? You're a little bit different than everybody else in the world.
But that's all adventurers in a D&D party, right?
That is true. That's
not just a dwarf or an elf. That's it.
No, that's what I'm saying. That automatically that makes you, I don't know, not odd, but different than 99% of everybody else.
It just makes you suspect.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about suspect, but it does make you an outlier than the rest of the group or the rest of society. So when we look at adventurers, I think they're just a little bit odd, right? They're a little bit, you could call them crazy. Cause,
Well, like you always tell the kids when we're playing D&D, think about you always go, well, you're going into this town, think about what they're seeing, especially when someone wants to play a tiefling, right? You say, look, this is what the people in the town are seeing. This red demon walking around with all these other people.
Right.
And how are you going to look to them? You're like fully armed. Everybody has knives and
Weapons,
swords and axes. And so
bows, crossbows,
yeah.
armed to the teeth is the word. Yes.
So how are the villagers going to look at you
and
when
they're
you walk into the
strangers
town? And you're strangers.
Yes. And the thing is, I think people don't realize is that when I've read a few history books in my day, and people didn't leave town. They didn't leave their area. I think even today they say, except it's becoming less and less common, but more people live within
60 miles.
60
today.
miles of where they were born.
And
right?
in medieval times it was
even less.
It was less. It was like
10 miles at the most, right?
Yeah, I think that the average was just between 2 and 10.
Yeah, because you basically were born and died in the same
village
and the same house.
Yeah.
Right, and you and your family lived in that area for extremely long period of time.
So having strangers come around was a
very
oddity,
and could be very dangerous if they're armed to the teeth, right? Because
Yes.
imagine you're a village and all you have is a hoe or a pitchfork at the most, right? And
you probably have some knives.
some knives,
I'm
right?
sure someone
And then here
has
comes with people with armor, right? Armed to the teeth. And some of them look really weird, right? Because they're not from your area, because usually they travel far away. And if you've never seen or heard or we've probably never seen an elf or a dwarf, it's going to be really shocking. I think there's just to reiterate how people don't move away from where they lived. Remember, I think we discussed this before. There was this guy in Germany. And they tested his DNA, right? Mm-hmm. And then they found this cave or this burial site of early men. And they tested that DNA, and they found that he was a descendant of that DNA. And that DNA was I think it was over 10,000 years old.
You don't even have to go that far. You can just look at.
But it's fascinating, right? This family. I mean, maybe they moved away and came back, but I don't know. But that he was literally 10 miles away from where they found the bones of that.
You don't have to go that far, Saul. You live almost exactly 60 miles away from where you were born.
Yes.
And so do I.
That's kind of weird.
Of course, we weren't born in the same place, but.
I think the only one that's moved far away is my brother Felipe, right?
And Adrian.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about my immediate family.
Yeah.
Everybody else has stayed within 60 miles.
Pretty much.
But there's other families that where people, especially in modern day America, a lot of families there's this just spreading out, right? I know people who have brothers in different states and this and that.
I have one brother in a different state.
That's true. Look at you. You have a brother in a different state. And your other brother lives out in the boondocks.
Well,
Ready?
but he's... No,
he?
he's Eureka.
Oh, he's in Eureka?
Yeah,
Wow,
somewhere out there.
that is the boondocks.
But not from where we were.
Where
he was born in
though?
Sacramento.
Sacramento.
Or around there, Yuba City. Somewhere.
He's in the same valley.
We're...
Northern California. But he's still not that far away.
My sister's probably 60, maybe 100 miles away from where she was born.
Right. So I think in modern times people do move farther away, but me and you, we still are like 60 miles away from where we were
Currently,
literally
yes.
where we were born.
Yes.
Currently, yes. Currently. So if people are that much homebodies, right? More or less. I don't know if you call them homebodies, but stay in the same area for most of their lives. Think of this idea that you're going to go out and travel the world on foot or on horse and live day by day, live out of your suitcase.
In the wilderness.
No
Backpack.
and out of your backpack, eating like dried food. And I think they also had this thing called tack.
Yes.
Hardtack.
Yeah.
And I never thought about it. People will talk
They're
about
like
it.
hard oat. Well, there's hard oat cakes, and then there's dried meat, right?
Well, it was funny because people have talked about hardtack since I was playing D&D, and I never really listened to their conversations. So when I was a kid, I didn't care, but it was rations, right? And they're like, what's in the ration? And they talk about it, trying to make a real world comparison about stuff. I didn't really listen to it, but as I got older, finally somebody said, well, this is how you make hardtack. And then it was a YouTube video. It is disgusting. It's like, it's, because they throw as much as they can in there, to make it like more
nutritious,
if you want to use that word. But it is nasty. I mean, I don't know what it tastes like.
In your opinion.
I don't know what I know. You're right. In my opinion. Like you said, it was like oat cake. Dried,
yeah, and
then they stick meat in there and like hard meat or salted meat and fat, and I'm like, that sounds disgusting. And they wrap it up in a piece of paper usually or cloth, oiled cloth for some reason. I don't know why, so it won't dry out. Sounds disgusting to me. But anyway, so I can understand where dwarves coming into town, especially if there's no dwarves in that area. They can be seen as monsters or like I don't know about monsters, but
they were different.
And different is not good when you're in an isolated village.
Yeah, so that's D&D, right?
Right.
That's basically what we're talking
or
about.
Or any fantasy game. Right.
Well, some fantasy games don't actually let you play dwarves.
Right. There's some games that
don't even have them.
They try to be more realistic or play not fantasy, but a medieval game.
Yeah.
A more realistic medieval game.
Yes.
Right. So dwarves, what else? They're short, right? I forgot to admit they're short.
I don't know how short are they. I'm thinking 5 feet.
They're probably like my size or shorter.
So you're 5'5".
Yeah, on a good day.
He always says that.
I'm more. I think honestly, I'm more like 5'4.5". If I wear shoes with the lifts in, I get another inch in there. No, I don't have lifts actually. But there's some people in my store that I work with, and they're definitely dwarf in height. I mean, they're shorter than me. And I forget what the official height of a dwarf is. It's like 4'8" to like 5, probably 5'5". I could classify as a dwarf. That's kind of sad. Anyway, so they're short, they're hairy, they like mines, they do stonework. Here's another one. They're seen as greedy or surly. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I read that too, and I'm sure there are some that are greedy and surly.
My son definitely picked up on that greediness. Remember when he played the dwarf?
Yeah. But he takes things a little bit literally. So he read it, right?
He was also very young, right?
Yes.
Well, I don't know, very young. He was what, 12 or 13?
Yeah.
So there is that impetus that as at that age, I remember when I was that young, that's all I cared about was gold, collecting stuff in my game.
Yeah, and when you're making a character when you're that age, right, it doesn't matter, you don't have life experience. So when it says that dwarves are greedy, then he decided that
you're going to go with the trope.
You're going to go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, at the very end, I said Scottish. Are they Scottish? I think this, one guy wrote that he loves playing dwarves because it lets him do his terrible Scottish accent, and he says it's pretty good until the rest of the party, rest of the players tell him to shut the hell up. And they don't want to hear his terrible Scottish accent, which Jolene would admit that I do have a terrible.
He does. He has a horrible accent. He's not good with accent.
You know what was funny is one time my son was doing the Scottish accent, and it sounded pretty good. I just seen way too much British television, I think. My wife is responsible for that, Jolene here. So, game elements. For me, game elements is that usually they're hardy, right? Like in D&D, they have a bonus to their Constitution. They're because of their stature, they usually have more life points, hit points, and stuff like that. What else do you know about dwarves? They like axes.
Well,
they fight with axes or picks because those are the weapons that they usually use, or those are tools that they use, right? The pick and
well, they have for what I read, and I read a lot of things. So in D&D, I guess there's subclasses, right? Like,
oh yeah,
there's hill dwarves and mountain dwarves. Are there other dwarves, or those?
there's a ton of subclasses.
Well,
There's underground dwarves, right?
Yeah, so it says it makes them tougher because if they're underground, right? But hill dwarves, they get a plus in their overall health every time they level up, and a lot of the feats that they can do are, and I don't know why. It depends on what they pick, right? But
Right.
they always have skills with axes and axes, picks. I don't think they have shovel. I mean, I don't think shovel is a weapon.
Well, it could be, but no, that's not usually considered a weapon. Picks and axes are real big in the whole cultural dwarves in the fantasy.
So they must
world.
get like a plus in their constitution.
Yeah. In D&D they do. I think it's a +2. So that makes them hardier. That makes them tougher. They're also in D&D they have, what is it? They have a favorite enemy.
Oh, it's usually orcs.
Hobgoblins.
Yeah.
I know I don't know if it was up to 3rd edition, but they used to get +2 to attack against large creatures. Like trolls,
Yes.
hill giants, and stuff like that. And they're harder to hit when you're fighting them and you're large.
It says that they have something called dwarven fortitude, so that I think that is part of their race.
That's like probably hit points and stuff like that. Yeah.
And then also that a lot of them can be good spellcasters, like if they're hill dwarves.
Oh wow.
Because they can wear armor and be a spellcaster. I don't know. I read a lot of stuff, so I could be that confused.
I remember in original D&D, the first D&D book rules that came out, they were a lot of times people would be dwarven clerics for some reason, and I don't know why. I don't know why that came about, and that's where I think that the idea that they're wise, right? Because they're older and they're sagely, they can be. I think Gimli's a kid, so therefore he acts and reacts like the way he does in the game, in the movies and in the books. But when you talk about older dwarves and how they're portrayed, at least in Tolkien, they're much more serene and they're much more.
I have a couple others after that one.
And they're seen as wise in Tolkien, the older dwarves.
So one of the articles I read said that if this guy was going to play a dwarf, this is how he would play it. And I thought it was pretty interesting. He said they're insular, as in they prefer the company of dwarves. But those that go adventuring obviously are adventuring, right?
Right.
But they probably wouldn't settle down to marry other than a dwarf, and they would want to live in their community if they were settled. And he says, depending on the world, they could be considered persecuted by others.
Wow.
And his idea that they find beauty in creation, like you were talking about the buildings with stone,
right,
and stuff like that. So maybe making jewelry or finding diamonds or gems in the earth could be and then creating something with them. Anyway.
Well, that's another thing. You're right. That they're seen as being very good at making things, not even stonework, but like weapons and silversmiths and stuff like that.
This guy says jewelry.
Well, silversmiths, jewelry.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do like gems.
So he also talks about them being resilient and long-lived.
Yes.
Outwardly stoic. And yet, he goes, I would play my dwarf as joyful, because dwarves obviously enjoy good things, a good meal, a good ale,
Right.
a good fight. good fortune. You know, they enjoy the stuff they do. Maybe because they're so long lived. I don't
They
know.
enjoy living life.
They like to plan stuff because they live for a long time.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Then he says maybe they're fixated on something like whatever, like why did they leave their village or what happened. Maybe there's a fixation they have, like a fixation on an enemy that destroyed their village or something like that, right?
Right.
But that's all adventurers, right? You have to have a
Impetus,
motivation for playing this character.
Well, motivation for that character to leave the comforts of home.
I don't know, but now that I've read all of these things about dwarves, I told Saul that maybe in one of our next D&D games I'll play a dwarf. Of course, she'll have to be a girl, and if she has facial hair, it'll have to be braided with bows in it, because how else would you know I was a girl? Because I don't know how you would know what a girl dwarf looks like.
Well, I think D&D 5th edition, no, 3rd edition, they had the drawings of each race, you know, like from the front and from the side, you know, to give you the perspective of what they look like. And I don't think they had beards, the female dwarves.
Yeah, I have
Remember
a
that?
feeling I've seen a picture of a female dwarf in D&D. I would have to look it up again because it's been a while.
They don't have.
I can
beards.
only picture Gimli.
Right.
So
Yes,
that's
I understand.
so what about other games?
Well, I was
wanted to play a dwarf.
I think outside of fantasy role playing games, there's dwarves, right? For example, well, there's Pathfinder, Starfinder, which is basically just Pathfinder in space, advanced the technology thousands of years later, and you have Starfinder, right? Mm-hmm. But and the same thing with
Do they have dwarves in Starfinder? Obviously,
yes. You know what? I really don't know.
because we have the book.
I don't even know where it is. You bought it,
I know. I really, really wanted to play that game until I did,
yes.
and there was space combat. Anyway, so I don't know.
Well, I would completely avoid space combat in
I'm just
any
saying,
kind of game. In any kind of game.
I'm just saying. But maybe I'm sure there have to be dwarves because it's Pathfinder. But I'll have to look it up.
I'm pretty sure there is dwarves. Next is and Warhammer 40K.
Warhammer
same
has
as,
its own
same as Warhammer,
right,
the fantasy game. So you advance it. There's dwarves in space, right?
and there are dwarves in. Is it in space? Warhammer's in space?
Warhammer 40K,
Oh,
40,000. They get it. There's Warhammer Fantasy, and then Warhammer 40K is 40,000 years in the future.
don't make fun of me, but I think I must have missed the 40. When you say 40K, I thought of figures for some reason.
That's the little models that everybody plays.
Yeah,
with.
I know, but I didn't realize it was 40,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
No, see, I missed that somewhere. I was lost in translation on Jolene.
With the eternal emperor that has lived for thousands of years.
That's how much I've paid attention to
Yeah.
Warhammer. Sorry.
I understand.
I apologize.
Anyway, so but another one is Shadowrun. But see, another thing is these all include dwarves, but also they're all stem from a fantasy game, right? Pathfinder, Starfinder. It's basically Pathfinder in space. Warhammer 40K is just the extension of that world. Shadowrun has a fantasy game called Earth Dawn that is supposedly, the precursor to Shadowrun. So Earth Dawn is about the sometime
before times.
sometime in the past,
Yeah.
right? And
When there were elves and dwarves and orcs.
And the idea is that slowly magic is leaving the world, and that's when they go away, and Shadowrun is when the magic comes back into the world.
I was reading about Shadowrun because I'm getting ready to run a game. I was reading that for every age the current Shadowrun is in the sixth world.
Sixth world.
So every even world has magic and every odd world doesn't.
Oh, it's a waxing and waning. And
Yes.
stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
And each world is how many years?
I don't know. I didn't read that part.
I think it's based on is it the Mayan calendar or the Aztec
then-
calendar?
I think it's the Mayan one, the one that's on the wall over there.
Is that the Aztec one?
I don't know. Maybe.
I think they both look similar.
They probably do.
Yeah. I think it's the Mayan
But,
calendar, the 2012, right?
2012, yes.
Right, the end of the world.
Yes.
The age of Aquarius, right?
Anyway, yes, so Shadowrun does have dwarves
Yeah, of
and
course.
elves, and They are very, and in Shadowrun,
Okay.
they take their racism seriously. It's right out in the open, and that's one of the other things I noticed reading these articles or Reddit or whatever. A lot of these people don't want dwarves and elves in their games,
Right.
or they don't want to play dwarves and elves because they find them foreign. They give them a. One guy said in his homebrew, he makes them. How did he put it? The foreign of mind, or what did he say? He said, because it's a human-centric game, and he's given them an alien mindset, dwarves and elves, and he doesn't want them in his game. I told Saul when I read that, I thought, wow, that's
An
very,
alien mind. So he doesn't even have them in his game,
he doesn't allow them to be played as player
but
characters.
are they in the game?
Yes.
Oh,
Because he's given them an alien mindset and motivations.
I can see that.
And if you played them, that would demystify them.
Okay, so we have a friend, remember Shannon, and he says that playing elves is very difficult, especially in the Tolkien
I think
world.
we talked about that.
Yeah, we
the
did
Elves.
when we talked about elves. So I could see people having that idea that they are so foreign in mind that you couldn't role play them because you couldn't role play them correctly.
You wouldn't be able to be so.
Whatever it is to be an elf.
Yeah.
So in the dwarf, so if this guy thinks about the same thing about everything else, then anything other than human, you wouldn't be able to play because you wouldn't know that experience, right?
Okay.
So I think that.
Can I call BS on that?
I don't want to go into the direction that I seem to be going into. So lately, there's a lot of games. You're like, no. Anyway, there's a lot of games that I don't want to get into it. So let's scratch that idea. I think it's a very interesting idea that you can't role play things that you don't know, but that's the whole point of role playing, right? Is to try to get into something else. Okay, for example, I'm going to play a special ops person in, let's say, Shadowrun. I have no freaking clue what a special ops person goes through or does. Yeah, I get the movies. They do all kinds of training. They're
Read
badass.
books.
Yeah, read books. I've read Tom
Even-
Clancy, whatever. But honestly, I don't know what they go through, right? So
Their
theoretic-
ethical dilemmas.
so theoretically, I shouldn't be able to play. I mean, if that way of thinking, I shouldn't be able to play anything. And then that kind of thinking is almost like I shouldn't be able to play anything but myself. And that's the whole point of role playing games, is to be able to play characters that you are not, or you wouldn't be able to play, imagine playing or being. So I think those kind of, I know I'm getting a soapbox, sort of a rant.
Well,
I
I
think
think what you're talking about is when we did the podcast on elves, there was this one video on YouTube that we watched where the lady was talking about how the reason she doesn't allow elves in her game is because she has this idea of elves,
Right.
and she doesn't want other people ruining her idea in her brain. She really likes elves, and she thinks that. And she had one guy who played an elf and said "cowabunga" at the
But
end
that's in
of
her world, right?
In her, yes.
Yeah, in her game. And I can understand that. But even then, there's going to be a black sheep in the family, even in elves. I know how perfect they are. But next game I play, I'm going to play an elf, and he's going to be the grungiest, stinkiest freaking elf you've ever seen. He's going to smoke cigars. He's going to have the what is it? The stains on his fingers from smoking so much. Yellow teeth. He's not going to have beautiful long hair. He's going to have
So
hair.
basically, what you're saying is that you should be able to play things that you don't identify with.
Of course, that's the whole point.
There you
And I
go.
think it's kind of crazy that people say, "Well, you can't play that because you don't." Well, I've never experienced being a freaking
Magician. I've never been a sorcerer,
right?
but I really like playing
Oh my
one.
god, people get crazy. This is gonna. We should talk about it later, but this is gonna be a topic for modern games where people play races other than the race that they are. And I don't even like using that term because it's ridiculous. But for example,
Oh, no.
I'm just going to say, for example, the idea that you can't play me, I wouldn't be able to play a black or African American in World War II, right? And I played in a game where I played an African American in World War II. In fact, we all were African Americans because it was a squad that we all played in. It was a guild game. It was a really great game. It was full of moral choices that we made and not made, and it was fantastic. And sometimes when people talk like that, it kind of makes me think that they don't want us to have that kind of game. Anyway, so dwarves I think are pretty cool. I always liked them. I've never really played them because of my stature. I'm almost a dwarf.
He's too close to him.
I'm too close. It's too close to home. Only thing is that I can't grow a beard, and that actually
This is true.
That frustrates me too.
Especially since his son grows a...
Yeah, he does look like Santa Claus, the early Santa Claus from the animation ones. You know, where he has that, it looks like sideburns. It goes just like, I don't know what kind of look that is. But anyway, that's what it looks like. Though lately I have noticed that I actually have to shave like every 2 days.
Okay.
Which is really frustrating because I used to go weeks without shaving. So I never really played a dwarf.
Okay, Saul's gone off way on a tangent. I think you're going to have to take out most of that last 5 minutes.
I think they'd be pretty cool to play.
So in Shadowrun,
in Shadowrun,
playing a dwarf is no big deal. I mean, you get special things for being a dwarf, right? You get different things for that race.
I think the only thing you get in Shadowrun is that you get like demographic vision.
Okay.
Being able to see in the dark and demographically, whatever that means.
Okay.
Is that heat sources? Thermographics, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. They might get something else, but
there's no dwarves in Traveler, right?
No. Traveler is human centric.
Yes.
Except for aliens.
Yeah.
No, actually there are like these they call them Kazins or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think they are. And they're like lion people. Or cat people.
I know that when there weren't any dwarves, but when in Tecumel, when we played with Felipe, I remember there's some kind of alien creature.
Yeah, there's aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played it on Oyoga.
And he played it very alien-ish.
Yes.
Because it was.
Right. He's the little squatty thing that looks like has 3 legs, 3 arms, and
so
3 eyes.
I mean, it's okay to play things that you don't identify with. Right?
Yeah, I think you have to in role playing games, or you're not, right? That's the whole point. I am not a wizard. I wish I was. I wish I could throw fireballs.
I think everybody does.
Lightning bolts from my fingertips.
You just don't want me to be one. That's all.
Well, either way, I think dwarves are pretty cool. I've already said that, but I think they're cooler to play than elves and easier to play than elves if you want to play the elf right? And dwarves are, like you said, they're more earthy. They like living life, so you can play that to the hilt.
Yeah. I have been inspired now to play a dwarf the next time we play D&D or Pathfinder or...
Any game that includes dwarf.
Yeah, maybe not Shadowrun. I don't know about... My son is my son's playing an elf. Jason played a dwarf in Shadowrun, but it was a totally...
He wasn't really a dwarf. He was tall. He had cyber limbs.
Well, that's because he had cyber limbs.
And then genetically, he was undwarvish.
Yeah, but he was... Yeah.
So I don't even know.
Shadowrun is an interesting one. I don't know. So
you spent the karma to be undwarvish, but had dwarvish qualities. Anyway.
That was a min-max thing, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was.
So I don't know. Maybe you could play a dwarf in your next game if they have dwarves and try to... You don't have to do a Scottish accent because I don't believe all dwarves have Scottish accents. Only dwarves from Scotland.
I think you should only do it if you really want to annoy your group.
Because most people don't do very good accents.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was gonna try it right now, but
please don't.
But I decided not to.
So take that part out of the description of your dwarf and go for it.
Correct. I agree.
Totally. There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
And you have a good day.